Hey everyone, just want to let you know that we have a Q&A episode coming out in July, and we are accepting questions for the Q&A episode right now.
If you'd like to submit a question to our July Q&A, go to GenreVision.com, and there on the main page you'll see a post that you can leave your questions in. Just click on the post and go to the comment section, type it in right there, or you can find the contact page there at GenreVision.com and send us a question that way. You can also email us questions directly to GenreVisionPod@gmail.com.
Make sure to get your questions in by the end of June, and we can get them answered on the July Q&A episode of GenreVision. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
And it's time to conclude May is Magical Month with the infamous Dungeons & Dragons from 2000. This movie is, I think it's fair to call it, universally reviled at this point, and was so upon release. It's obviously a very loose adaptation of the popular tabletop roleplay game. And for as notorious as this movie is, the most surprising thing about watching this was how unremarkable it is.
Yeah, there are multiple flavors of bad that you start to learn when you see enough movies. And there is remarkably bad, where you're like, wow, this is bad enough that I really feel the need to say something about it. And then there is the kind of bad where all the ways in which a movie is bad just aren't all that interesting to talk about. And that's the case with Dungeons & Dragons. Obviously, our job here is to talk about the film as much as we can, but I feel like it's going to be especially difficult for you and me today because this movie is bad in a myriad of boring ways. It's not like one of these movies where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm seeing in this horrendous movie. No, I believe it. I just wish I hadn't seen it.
Well, this is an instance where I am more deeply fascinated and engaged by the story of how this movie got to the screen than I am the finished product.
Oh yeah, there's way more drama and turns and twists and that kind of thing. Because like the guy who ended up directing it had this campaign to direct this movie for like over 10 years.
It's this wonderful like hero's rise and fall story that I would much rather watch a movie about that, where this person, Courtney Solomon, who has this incredible story, which is actually very detailed on the Wikipedia page for this movie, about how he was trying to get this movie made, but he was never intending to direct it. And long story short, he was eventually kind of forced into the directing position. And that passion for the movie is really infectious to read about, so much so that apparently that was what got Jeremy Irons to sign on to play Profion, which sounds like a, antidepressant or something.
I was going to say, sounds like a boner pill.
Yeah. It's more, I think, like Prozac, like, so Profion, or maybe, it's like an anti-diarrheal.
Yeah.
The point is, it does not sound like an evil wizard name. That, he was so enthused by the story of this one person trying to get this movie made for almost 10 years, that's what signed him on to the project, allegedly. And the actual movie that we get, it barely rates above the kind of TV movie fare that we were seeing on like the Sci-Fi Channel at this same time. And frankly, this was originally intended to go direct to video. It was not originally going to be a theatrical release. And even though the movie got an injection of $30 million thanks to producer Joel Silver, it still comes across feeling like a TV movie that was made for $3 million. Exactly.
I'd be really curious how this script changed from when it was originally intended to be a direct-to-video or, a TV movie versus like when it got that boost of funding and it was suddenly intended for theatrical release. Like what changed about it exactly? Like what did they expand? What did they feel like they could be a little bit more ambitious with? Looking at the screenwriters, the two that are credited are these people named Topper Lillian and Carol Cartwright. And neither of them have a huge list of credits. That doesn't mean a whole lot when it comes to writers, because you can do a lot of uncredited work.
I'm sorry, Topper Lillian sounds like a Harry Potter character.
Lillian Topper sounds a little bit more like a Harry Potter character to me.
Lillian Topper sounds like a dominatrix porn name. Like,
hi, I'm Lillian Topper. Look, no matter what the case is, like, I can't clock these two screenwriters. I don't know who the fuck they are. They're total randos to me. I don't know what kind of influence Courtney Solomon had in the writing of this. I don't know what influence Joel Silver had. Gary Gygax is credited as the creator of the game upon which this is based. But did he have a crack at the script? Like, did anybody at Wizards of the Coast look at the script and go, yeah, it gets our seal of approval?
Well, does it have a dungeon? It doesn't have a dragon? All right, we don't care. Go spend $30 million. So, well, okay, so because here's the thing. Normally on the show, we try and break down, the plot and follow the plot of the movie as we make our points. We are not going to do that with Dungeons and Dragons, because I challenge anyone listening to do a beat by beat plot breakdown of this movie. Granted, it's there to be done, but as you are watching the movie, it is such nothing.
The challenge is in remembering it. Because, like, I remember, like, oh, there's a scene where they go do this and the scene they go do that. Like, I remember the rough order of those things.
It's a challenge of remembering it while you're watching the movie.
Sure.
Because there were moments where I'm like, I don't know why this person is here, or what are they trying to get right now? Because this, I'll say this, and we said it during our screening, the closest movie I can think of when it comes to the problems of the plotting and the writing of this was Rise of Skywalker.
Right. Now, this is a very MacGuffin-driven plot where they're always looking for the rod of Bimbley-Bum or the eye of Scribbity-Doo or the map of Stimblestew. And this is very driven from like D&D modules. That is inherently a part of the Dungeons and Dragons lore and structure and like how people play the game. So I understand like the MacGuffin driven plot making sense for Dungeons and Dragons, but
the MacGuffins mean nothing.
Yeah, they're absolutely meaningless.
There's nothing to tie them to the characters or their emotions or particular drives outside of the larger plot just telling us these things are important. And that was so present in Rise of Skywalker, where it's like, you're just telling me this thing is important and not showing me why it's important.
Right. But at least in Rise of Skywalker, like, we kind of knew who the characters were going into it because they were, in two other movies. This time,
this plays like we know who the characters are. Like, we saw two other movies that feature them.
I don't know. Maybe there's kind of like an abandoned movie in the middle of this movie, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Like, Jeremy Irons is the first one we meet as Profion, and we're like, okay, I can fuck with Jeremy Irons. Like, this, he's chewing the scenery. He's standing in front of blue screens a lot. We'll get to the visual effects, but okay, we meet him. We meet his hench person, Damodar, who's played by actor Bruce Payne, who was the bad guy in Passenger 57. Sure. And Damodar is like this big, bald dude with bright ice blue lips, and it's a silly look, but I'll be hard pressed to find like a more iconic look in the film. Like, I'll remember that. I've definitely remembered that from when I first saw this.
He was iconic enough that they brought him back in the sequel.
Yeah, and he's a big he is as big a head on the poster as Jeremy Irons.
Look, we're searching for like the pieces of hay in a needle stack here, people, because like it was not enjoyable to watch this movie. And we went going in, because when we pick a movie like this, we assume that like, okay, this is notoriously bad and reviled. One, can we find something in here that we think is actually worthwhile and people aren't talking about? And two, does it deserve its reputation for being bad? Not just because, oh, actually this is really good, but does it deserve to be notably bad, as, quote, one of the worst movies of all time? We hate that moniker, but that's how these things, circle around in the conversation.
Sure. And something I think you and I have found with movies like this that have reputations like this, particularly from this era, is like time can be a little kind to them. I feel like time has been kind of oddly kind to like Halle Berry's Catwoman.
Yes, I mean we had a fairly enjoyable time discussing that movie and picking apart things, even the things that are bad. But I mean, with this,
yeah,
like
that movie was at least fun to talk about.
I mean, this is something that I'm amazed at I think the only reason it has its notoriety is its name. The fact that it's called Dungeons and Dragons attaches it to some bigger piece of pop culture that means it will always have some kind of reference point, because otherwise 99% of this movie is not bad enough that it's worth talking about.
No, it's just generic, like you said, the DTV level high fantasy.
Yeah, and so I do want to highlight just a few of the things that were actually good in this movie, because it's there. And Bruce Payne and Jeremy Irons are two of them. Like,
sure. Jeremy
Irons is doing exactly what you want out of a role like this. He's chewing the scenery. He is playing to the nosebleeds. And my God, I wish there was more of him in the movie, because there actually isn't. He's vacant, like, for a majority of it.
Yeah, he's got very little screen time, and most of the villain work is on Damodar's pauldrons.
Which is fine, because Bruce Payne is doing a similarly campy performance, but to a point where Travis and I could not help but it crosses over almost into a drag performance.
Yes, if you give me the eye of Ziminzu, then I'll let you die quickly. He's saying it through his big blue lips, and I'm like, man, if you're like out queering Jeremy Irons as the villain in this movie, like, you're doing something right.
I mean, yeah, this dude out-queered Scar.
Because Jeremy Irons is very Jafar, kind of playing a Vincent Price thing.
He's calling upon that Scar energy, when he's just like, the skies will rain with their blood.
And it gets even gayer because he's always talking about the rod. Give me I need the rod to control.
Yeah, he's like, give me the rod.
Damodar, give me the rod.
So that's a fun, slightly ironic read on the movie, but it's there. It's fun. Also, Damodar gets, I think, the one piece of good drama in the movie, in which he's serving Profion to do. I'm not going to get into the whole political overthrowing bullshit of this, because it's not worth talking about. But the idea is that he has been basically possessed by a creature that is going to kill him unless he executes the will of Profion to do bad guy stuff. And there's one scene where he talks to this captured mage character, and he says, like, I don't care about Profion wanting to take the throne. I've been loyal to the throne my whole life. And she's like, then why are you helping him? And he just goes, look at me. And his head gets all CGI goopy, and then worms shoot out of his ears and plug into her ears to suck information out of her brain. It's like, hey, a scene of goodness.
Well, and it's like it's an effects gag that actually works in the film, and the effects aren't bad. It's kind of effectively gross. The performances sell it. It's such a rare gem in a movie like this, where it's like, oh, this scene actually sort of works. Like, it has an interesting premise. There's an interesting dynamic between these two. The lighting is good. They're close-ups, cut back and forth. It's, it's a scene that works, and that's such a rarity in this movie, because like so many of these scenes in this film take place in locations that they shot in Prague. So it never really feels sufficiently like fantasy. It almost just feels like, oh, they're shooting in they're just shooting in a church in Prague.
Yeah, they got the opera house for the weekend.
They do.
That kind of stuff. But well, I'm glad that they're, using locations and sets, because those are going the way of the dodo in movies.
Sure.
Specifically movies like fantasy movies. But there's other good stuff here. Another person who, again, is not in the movie nearly enough is Richard O'Brien of Rocky Horror Picture Show fame.
Yeah, he plays some dude named Xylus, who's like the head of a thieves guild in one of the cities.
Or as you immediately recognize, it's like, hey, it's the Mr. Book or Hand or Pencil guy from Dark City.
Yeah, he's one of the main, I guess
what
do they call them? The others or the outsiders in Dark City?
Yeah, what do they call? I don't remember.
The floating guys with the hats who are all pale, but he's got a great performance in Dark City. And because of my established unfamiliarity with the Rocky Horror Show, I did not know that he was one of the creators of Rocky Horror. Drew obviously knew that and knew that he played Riff Raff in the movie and all this kind of stuff. But Richard O'Brien, I feel, is like the only other performer in the movie that is kind of matching Jeremy Irons on his level of cheese enthusiasm.
I think he's the only other one that's getting it. Like this movie, like This movie also has Lee Ehrenberg, who a lot of people may not know by name, but he's one of the two comedic relief pirates in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. And he's doing a similarly cheesy goofball comedy take on a dwarf, but he's not getting it. Whereas somebody like Richard O'Brien, he's on it. Like, he's there to be this big camp thing. And his appearance is an in-joke to him hosting a show called The Crystal Maze, which is a very popular game show over in the UK. And his character in this is the person who hosts a maze that they have to go through. And he is the only other person aside from Bruce Payne and Jeremy Irons who delivers something, a performance worth noting, because it's like, yeah, he's there. And again, it's the people who are kind of having this drag camp take on the material, which I think a lot of like D&D faithful would see as sacrilegious. But for us, it's like, oh, thank God, a refuge in this ocean of nothing.
Yeah, Lee Ehrenberg's performance is it's unfortunate because like the dwarf character, Elwood, it's such a fucking one-note character, and I
refuse to believe they ever said his name in the movie.
Yeah, it's just dwarf guy who's around. His costume is shit. His beard is, again, it's all like Party City. It looks so cheap, and again, the character is so one-note. All of his jokes and attempts at comic relief are painfully unfunny. There is one weird joke where he gets an extreme close-up and like, I think it's designed to be like a fourth wall break, where he looks right down the barrel of the camera and he goes, "That's not a good way to make money," or something like that. And it seems to be some sort of like pointed joke that only the director gets. I was like,
well,
what?
it's a setup for a reveal shot, because then he ducks out of frame and there's another character behind him hiding in a tree.
Right. The elf lady.
Yeah.
Not Angelina Jolie.
Not Ruth Negga. This should have been my shelf pick, but now I'm just going to say it here. This needed to be, and I can't believe I'm saying this, more like Warcraft, where Warcraft leaned into its cartoon stupidness, like in terms of design and world. It takes itself too seriously, but in terms of looking like you expect a Warcraft movie to look, it nailed it. This, with $30 million, it looks, I said to you, I think this might be a quintessential bad Ren Fair movie.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's the costumes. It all seems very low effort. And in so many ways, they're just like, what can we find? What can we get? This whole idea of adapting Dungeons and Dragons into a visual medium is a tough one, because there are as many ways for Dungeons and Dragons to look as there are people who play and write Dungeons and Dragons. There is no established look for it, really.
I mean, yes and no.
I guess you could say that there are certain established things about the way certain creatures look, but again, like you go through all the different iterations of like when they revise the edition, revise the handbooks for editions. It's like they revise things. There are no agreed upon constants in so many things about this world. Whereas Warcraft, like that is a strong aesthetic, and I think them being able to use that aesthetic in the movie and like really embrace it for all that it is, and it's like very toyetic designs. Like, yeah, good on them for doing that. They also had with Warcraft like certain characters that people were expecting to see within the lore. Now, Dungeons and Dragons lore, as written by people like Gary Gygax and the team at Wizards of the Coast, like it's rich with characters and races and kingdoms and gods, and as far as I know, almost none of it is in this movie.
Well, I know they made a point that the realm that this takes place in is totally fabricated for the movie. The reason they said is like, well, we wanted to make something that would be more accessible to non-fans, so they were afraid of getting too steeped in the lore, which I don't think was a bad take, but it also means that, well, you're sanding off all of the interesting, unique edges about what people like about Dungeons and Dragons, and you're just sanding it down into a much more generic DTV fantasy thing.
Exactly.
When like a beholder creature popped up in terrible CG, and don't worry, we're going to talk about the visual effects. I was like, hey, a thing from D&D that's kind of emblematic of being Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, like beholder is such a specific thing. Like dragons are so common in high fantasy fiction. And the dragon here, the designs are just so generic that it's like it doesn't really seem special. So the fact that they're talking about dragons and the fact that there's a dragon in the first scene was like, who cares? It looks like shit. But when a beholder shows up, you're like, okay, that's unique to this property. I don't see things like that in other movies. Like more of that kind of stuff, please.
It still looks like shit, but yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, let's just, because the only thing I've ever heard talked about generally about this movie have been the visual effects. And here's my blanket statement is like, yeah, they look bad. And that's it, because they don't even look especially bad, like in terms of notably bad. Like they look poor. Like they, every cliche, and it's like, oh, this looks like a video game cutscene. It's like, sure, yeah, they do. And that's it. Like, I've seen much more interesting bad effects in movies.
Yeah, like the Mortal Kombat reptile kind of stuff in that first one.
Right. That's bad, but it is indelibly bad.
Yeah, it is memorable just how shitty that effect is. Or, the shitty CGI at the end of Mortal Kombat Annihilation. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that. But the bad CG here is never quite bad enough to be like, whoa, I'll never forget that. It's just such generic designs.
It's blandly ugly. And maybe this is part of our upbringing, is that I just saw a lot of this same quality stuff on movies that were premiering on the Sci-Fi Channel. And because they're premiering on the Sci-Fi Channel, there's a lower, kind of barrier of entry and expectation as opposed to a $30 million theatrically released movie. But now with time, Dungeons and Dragons just looks like that same kind of straight to TV fare of its era.
Yeah, there was a Dean Cain movie, a sci-fi movie called Dragon Fighter, released in 2003, and the CG in that pretty much looks exactly like what's going on in 2000's Dungeons and Dragons. It's not a great look, and I would be more forgiving of the bad CG in this movie if there weren't so goddamn much of it,
and if they were at least trying creative things, because that's the thing, is the blandness really comes with they're not doing a whole lot of interesting framing. They're not doing weird ideas with the effects. Like when people shoot spells, they are the most like Adobe plugin After Effect lightning that you've ever seen.
Right.
Like it's like you're not doing anything. Like at least with Warcraft, it was like, well, weird runes are floating around their hands, and like a guy has to hold a point of energy light to create a teleport portal. There was weird ideas in the effects, even if they looked cartoonish. Whereas with Dungeons and Dragons, no dragon does anything interesting effects wise. No spell. Like a binding spell is literally someone shoots a rope. Like just a rope happens.
Right. Well, I mean, often, in descriptions of D&D spells, like the descriptions for a lot of those spells that have been around since early editions of the game are not that exciting. So I can understand them wanting to be accurate to that kind of stuff, but it's not, like you said, it's really not exciting to look at.
You're a filmmaker. Like fucking do something with it.
Yeah,
like be creative.
It's pretty apparent to me that when we talk about stuff like this, there never really seems to be a vision from Courtney Solomon on how this would look. Like there doesn't seem to be like any sense of like grand ambition that I get from this film. I understand that having a very limited budget or like trying to design something that's going to be a TV movie, like I understand there's a limit on that kind of ambition you can have, but like where is, what was inspiring you? Like they tried to get, Solomon was trying to get like Francis Ford Coppola and James Cameron and Rennie Harlan and Stan Winston interested in this movie.
And they did the right thing and did not make it because clearly the vision was not there. Now, I want to say one more good thing about the movie, because the only other thing we need to, I think, tackle main wise is the cast. But I want to say something good, because there is an effects moment in this movie that's good.
Oh, I think there's a scene in this movie that's like flat out really good.
Yes, it's actually the best thing in the movie, and we both perked up like, where the fuck was this? It's later in the movie. Our main character, I'm not even going to look at his name. It's Justin Whalen.
We haven't even mentioned him yet, by the way,
because the characters are nothings. So like Justin Whalen's character, who played the kid in Child's Play 3, he played Andy. he gets to this big treasure vault and he's trying to finally get the rod. He's going to finally put the rod in his hands. And he
Stand back, everyone. I'm going to grab the rod.
Oh, this rod, it's just throbbing with incredible power. Anyway, you're an easy target for these rod jokes. I like that. So anyways, he gets into this giant treasure room, which I think you rated a 6 out of 10 on the Stephen Sommers treasure room scale.
Lower.
Okay.
It was a 4.5 out of 10 on the Stephen Sommers scale. Yeah.
Okay. But he gets in this room and it's like, okay, at least it's a space that's something. And he finds this skeleton that's holding the magical dragon rod that will control the red dragons. And he goes to grab it and the skeleton pops up and is like, I am the holder of the, why do you want this? And all this kind of stuff. And he's, like the rod, the power of the rod is something you can only discover for yourself. And it's like, oh, okay. It's a masturbation allegory. But this moment with this talking skeleton, which is just a skeleton, like it's just a puppet skeleton, was like, hey, this is cool.
Yeah, but it was above like Party City level skeleton.
And they shot it from a low angle. Like,
yeah, the lighting is good in this location. Like it totally worked as an adventure movie scene. Like Ridley goes into the cave alone. There's some like cool green lighting as he works his way through the darker areas of the cave. He slides down a trapdoor hole and he raises his torch to the secret trapdoor and, figures out the puzzle to be let in the door, and the doors part and it's flooded with white light. And I'm like,
the music swells.
This is working. The score is coming up and being really present in the mix and playing a memorable, at least in the moment, motif. It was all working. And once we got in the treasure room, I was like, okay, it's dinky, but it's beautiful. And this is the kind of adventure film spirit that I was missing all along.
It's the most Dungeons and Dragons feeling thing in the whole movie.
It's also the most Indiana Jones.
No, it's not, because the most Indiana Jones thing is the maze sequence where they directly rip off Raiders of the Lost Ark twice.
Well, that's the thing that is most, I think, stealing from Indiana Jones. But this is the thing that most feels like the good things about Indiana Jones movies.
Right. It's evoking the feeling, not the because I was flabbergasted at how blatant the rip-off sequences in that maze were, where there's a light beam that he sticks his hand out and spikes come out. And then when he gets to the end of the maze and there's a jewel on a podium, it's framed exactly like the opening Raiders thing with the idol. It was
sure.
I'm like, look, there's homage and then there's just lazy.
Yeah.
And this was lazy. But like what you're saying with this treasure room scene, it's like, yeah, this actually is evoking the feeling that you get from Raiders of the Lost Ark when, he gets into the Staff of Ra room, and it's like, yeah, fucking, this is what a Dungeons and Dragons movie should be capitalizing on. And unfortunately, it's not. But we have to talk about the cast, and really that's about all I have left to talk about. And even they're not that notable, but
yeah, there's this main trio. It's Justin Whalen as this thief Ridley, and then there's his friend Snails, played by Marlon Wayans, who was shooting Requiem for a Dream at the same time and flying back and forth between Prague and New York. There is this chick named Zoe McClellan as Marina, the young, sorceress.
Mage. Yeah, there's this whole thing about like mages are the ruling class of the. Mm-hmm. We are not going to get into the dumbass political comment.
In this city, all the mages are rich people, and then everybody else is a prole.
So Justin Whalen and the mage person, Zoe McClellan, did you say? Is that her name?
Yeah.
They are, Justin Whalen and Zoe McClellan are total nothings. Like they try to have this, Han Solo, Princess Leia bickering relationship that buds into a romance. There's a sequence where they magically enter a map, which is another realm. And then they come back out and they have learned vital information to get the plot going. And they have things like, well, you shouldn't have trusted that Wraith and stuff. And we're like, a whole act happened in the movie off screen.
Yes. Meanwhile, what we've been watching while our two heroes are stuck in the map is an incredibly, deeply, awfully boring bar fight scene with Marlon Wayans.
That's too many like notable adjectives. It's nothing. So much of this was just nothing. And to speak on Marlon Wayans, at first when we were watching it, you had said that you believe he was miscast. And after a while, I was like, he's not just miscast. He's outright bad in this movie.
He is.
they are clearly asking him to do a particular shtick, which maybe it could have worked. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it feels so pandering and dumb. And he himself is not, he's not capable of making this work. And, you know, I get the feeling that there was probably some level of improvisation in terms of particular lines that he delivered, and nothing, like, there is never a funny moment that comes from Marlon Wayans. I don't think there's a funny moment in the movie intentionally.
No, there's never a good laugh or really any laugh to be had in the movie. Marlon Wayans' character eventually dies at the hands of Damodar. And so he's this sort of tragic loss that propels them into the low point.
He's the Obi-Wan.
Sure. No, Drew. No.
Well, I mean, here's the thing is that Courtney Solomon has talked about how he was trying to use specifically Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark as the frameworks for this. And those frameworks are the problem is that no character in the movie ever is a character. They barely are archetypes. Like they're that flat and uninteresting and undeveloped. Thora Birch is in this movie. Poor Thora Birch.
I feel so awful for her.
Coming off of Ghost World. Off of Ghost World. A great movie.
Well, and hadn't she, when was American Beauty?
That was, I think, was that 99?
It is 99.
So yeah, this is, coming off of Ghost World and American Beauty. And she does this. And I mean, she makes Natalie Portman's performance as Queen Amidala in The Phantom Menace looks like it was being delivered by Meryl Streep at the height of her powers, because Thora Birch is essentially playing the same role, a vacant, somewhat monotoned royalty figure that's fighting for the good of the people.
Yeah.
And she's eventually presented in the climax as this super warrior person, and you're like, why? She hasn't been a character. She's had like 2 scenes.
There is one scene where she stands in front of the council of mages with Profion, and she has to deliver such fucking gobbledygook dialogue. The kind of dialogue where she just sort of like baldly states her intentions, where she's not really having a conversation. There's just words falling out of her mouth and just the flattest, most awful way. And I don't criticize any of these actors to shit on them. Really, I don't. And it's the same reason that I cut Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman a lot of slack when I talk about the Star Wars prequels. When you're given dialogue this bad and you're not given the support of a great director, you can only do so much.
Sure. And I mean, that element of it with everybody in the, like, at least somebody like Jeremy Irons knows that I'm just going and no one's going to stop me because fuck it. And it's like, God, I wish everybody else had that energy. There needed to be more fuck it energy here.
Sure.
And Thora Birch, unfortunately, being a young actress and, trying to, get, be in more high prestige, whatever blockbuster stuff, if that was her goal, this does her such an incredible disservice. And in the same token, does the movie a huge disservice, because any kind of attempt at political commentary that it's doing, it falls so flat to the point where in the end there is voiceover where she just says, like, all of you people are now equal. Like, that's the level of political discourse this is striving for, was that, like, well, by stopping the dragons and getting the rod, now everybody is equal. And it's like, what the fuck are you even talking about? Like, what are you attempting in any way to say? Because you're attempting something, but it is like 6th grader level understanding of politics.
It is the most vacuous class commentary I think I've seen in a genre film of this sort of, I don't know, level. I mean,
it's up there. It's way up there.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of just being so, like, it's not even like an armchair. It's like Ottoman philosophizing. Like,
it's kind of like it's like a Neil Breen appreciation of politics, like in so many movies.
That's even
like,
a disservice. Like, at least he has a strong viewpoint
and many opinions.
Yes.
But this one is just like, now you are all equal. Okay,
great. I mean,
what does that look like? Other than the characters standing around Snails' grave, I don't know, in leather daddy gear and being like, well, it's time to go on our next adventure.
Word. So here's the thing. We picked this movie because we wanted to end the month. We thought it would be what we behind the scenes have called clowners, where it's like it's a movie that's pretty widely disliked, and we want to try and have some fun with it and maybe find some things that are worthwhile in it. This is not a Junior, as we've had on this show before, where like in some ways this makes me slightly, very slightly appreciate Junior more because it evoked a strong reaction in me.
Yeah.
This is more akin to when we were doing movies like Morgan.
Right, where it's just there's like a base level of functionality that it achieves, but it's so unambitious and devoid of anything inspirational. I mean, just flatline, regrettable, really.
Well, I mean, here's the thing is that my big takeaway from this is that I want to, in our very peripheral, very small corner of, internet movie discourse, I want to rub some of the like stink sheen off of this movie because it's so trumpeted as like one of the worst movies ever. And I'm like, it doesn't deserve that because it's not notable enough to be in that class of movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's far more forgettable and far less interesting than any other 5 worst movies that like, this is no Troll 2 or Birdemic or heck, even big budget failures that we've covered, like Catwoman, like Halle Berry's Catwoman, those deserve more discussion and attention than this ever will.
Totally agreed.
So that's Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, it's kind of a bummer way to end May as Magical Month because looking back on the month and how we did, I actually think we had a really good month of movies sans Dungeons and Dragons.
I mean, magic in cinema is really just an excuse to be able to do anything you want, to be as free with the rules of reality as you want to be. A movie like Simply Irresistible, I think, is way more inspirational and more inspired, really, with its use of magic.
You're still thinking about that movie, aren't you?
I am, absolutely. Yeah. It's really stuck with me. I think it's way more inspired with its use of magical elements than something like Dungeons and Dragons. And it's such a disappointment to see like such huge potential. Like it's a whole world centered around magic, and yet it is really the most boring use of it because we've seen some really fascinating and fun uses of it throughout the month. Yeah,
I actually think that, with the exception of the Never-Ending Story, the first one, using kind of traditional fantasy magic has been the least interesting take on this stuff. We covered a lot of the 80s fantasy movies and stuff. And we did Crawl, which was originally the Dungeons and Dragons movie. And even that has kind of mostly left my brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate because I think magic is a great tool, like you're saying, to really go nuts with a genre premise. And if nothing else, I mean, I'm just stoked that the month happened, that I have somebody else in the Simply Irresistible cult with me now. And hopefully some of you loyal listeners, because that movie deserves it. That movie's so unique.
Yeah. I'm really happy to be there and the member of that club. Never Ending Story, looking back at it, is a movie about the boundless potential for healing and joy in magical fiction. By allowing the existence of magic in fiction, it really opens up so many possibilities that you can explore, ways to, give yourself joy and to heal and to find exciting new things about your own life. And Dungeons and Dragons is the opposite, where it falls like so rotely in some like template that it's I don't know, worthy of being forgotten. So
we're gonna forget it.
Yeah.
And we're gonna move on to our shelf picks for this episode. The Shelf is a collaborative effort where we pick a movie that acts as a good substitute or pairing for our main topic. And we encourage you to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. And when you do, we will feature them on next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Dungeons and Dragons?
This is kind of an easy and obvious shelf pick, I feel, but, sometimes those are the best picks. I think it was just over a year after. I forget exactly when Dungeons and Dragons hit theaters in 2000, but it was in 2000.
I can tell you exactly when it was.
Oh,
it was in December because I took an entire That was my birthday party movie for that month. So it was late December.
So it was a year, almost a year exactly after the release of Dungeons and Dragons that New Line put out the Fellowship of the Ring, and you can't really ask for like a more significant upgrade because the Fellowship of the Ring is, oh gosh, is it the best high fantasy film ever?
Yes, no reservation at all. I mean, people will talk about the different entries, and there are other high fantasy movies worth being in the conversation, but I am inextricably tied to how powerful and how great the Fellowship of the Ring is. It's not only iconic in a pop culture sense. To me, it is. If I think of the best attempt at turning fantasy into cinema, it's Fellowship of the Ring.
Sure, specifically high fantasy. So the clear differences here is that you have a director who had a really ambitious and solid vision for what this should be, and came at it with the idea of like adapting something classic that everybody had their own interpretation of, but lending his very own specific ideas about aesthetic to it. Like it has such specific aesthetic flavor, and a lot of that came from the really brilliant minds who were working at What a Workshop at the time. You know, really incredible artists who helped define really the look of Lord of the Rings.
It's got a much bigger horror energy than I think is necessarily present in the original text, and that's absolutely from Peter Jackson and his team's influence.
Sure, like a monster movie breaks out in Fellowship of the Ring like every 20 minutes. It's fucking great for somebody like me. But also it has, I think, the most probably iconic locations of all of the Lord of the Rings movies. They have such a wonderful journey from, you know, the Shire to Rivendell, and then from Rivendell to Moria, and then from Moria to the lakes, and seeing the giant statues on either side of the waterfall. I forget the exact name of them right now. I used to know it, of course, because I've had to remember one more password for an account that pushed those the names of those statues out of my head. But
your new passwords, Lothlorien _
exactly. Is it the Argonath? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking of the Abernath, statues, which is the name of the fucking MacGuffin in Star Trek Beyond.
That's true. Yes, no, Fellowship. It will always. That's a movie that I think will be impossible for me to remove certain personal feelings about it. Like it's too deeply embedded.
It's one of my favorite moments in all of cinema. Is the moment in The Mines of Moria where they are doing this sort of escape off of the stone bridges that are collapsing, and they make their narrow escape. You get the big high angle down, and Howard Shore's Fellowship theme kicks in its most heroic iteration. It is pure goosebumps material every time. You're just not going to beat the high that I get from that. It's a very important movie to me. And to see that swing that New Line made between these two films, I don't know, maybe Joel Silver was the difference. I don't think Joel Silver had anything to do with the Lord of the Rings stuff. I think it was all producers. Mark Ordesky.
Bob Shea.
Yeah, Bob Shea had something to do with it. So anyway, that's my shelf pick, and I know it's an obvious and easy one, but I couldn't not do it.
Now I want to watch Fellowship again. Like just talking about oh yeah, like that movie is just perfect. It's perfect to me. And I'm hot take, theatrical version.
Always. Oh yeah. The edit on the theatrical version is just crazy good.
Yeah. So, I brought up one movie during our screening. It's a movie we've done an episode on, and it's going to be my shelf pick. I'm going with The Beastmaster, because The Beastmaster was this movie that I had fond nostalgia for, because I would catch bits and pieces of it on TV as a kid. And it was always like, oh yeah, and there's this part and that part and yada, yada, yada. But when we did our episode, we actually were kind of middling to not great on The Beastmaster.
No, there's a lot about that movie that sucks, and there's a lot about that movie that's really fun.
But while we were watching Dungeons and Dragons, I was like, this is making me miss The Beastmaster.
Oh yeah, I would have given, I don't know, not a body part, but I would have given like one of the pieces of technology off my computer desk to be like, I will trade you this if you will just swap this. If you will relieve us of the duty.
The Beastmaster.
Yeah, exactly. If you relieved us of our dungeons and duties for this week and you just let us watch The Beastmaster again, like please.
Well, because while The Beastmaster is flawed, it's like you're saying, there is an undeniable vision in The Beastmaster.
Yeah. How else can you get the man drinkers?
You get man drinkers. You get weird, those weird monster like henchmen things that are the leather daddy goblin people. You get like, who decided that we like ferrets were going to be a good companion? Let's just spray paint that tiger black.
Yeah, hand me that tiger and that big can of black spray paint, and let's make this movie happen, baby.
There's something now really like, because you look at Dungeons and Dragons and its cheapness is never endearing. It adds to the flat, boring quality of it. But the Beastmaster's independent cheapo spirit, like painting a tiger black, now is like really endearing to me.
It's endearing, but it was also shitty. It's really shitty.
Yeah, but
in
shitty
hindsight.
can be endearing. Like, I mean, that I think that's part of my.
It makes it a relic of a bygone era too, which also you like and I like.
Well, it's also. I mean, I really do get a kick out of being able to see an independent spirit like on screen. Like, it's like I can see how they're trying to get this done, and they're trying to do something creative with it. Does it always work? No, certainly not in the Beastmaster, but I can see the attempt at chasing a vision there.
Sure.
Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, I see nothing. It's like looking at a cloudless sky where it's just like, yep, that's it.
Right.
And that's even too nice.
When you're given a set of limitations in making a film, whether it be monetary limitations or, I don't know, certain creative limitations, orders from executives that say you can't have this in your movie or whatnot. It's on you as a filmmaker to find creative ways to work with those limitations or get around them if you can. And doing so, I think, often breeds really creative solutions. And Dungeons and Dragons is a film with like zero creative solutions. Like, every solution was like, oh, well, we can't afford that. I'll get the cheaper version. We can't afford good looking armor. Just buy shitty armor and shitty costumes. Like, everything looks like the more boring, more cheap, uninspired version of what it should be. It's ugh. Anyway.
Well, now we have to head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Black Magic 2. Mr. Milksteak went with Peter Jackson's Dead Alive and Versus, the Ryohei Kitamura movie, which I think it just recently or is recently getting a new release.
Yeah, I think that's on the horizon. A new 4K or new HD restoration, something. I think Arrow might be doing that one.
Yeah, I might revisit. I think I revisited that recently, but I'll revisit again if it's in 4K.
Yeah, it was one of the first movies I rented from Blockbuster and thought to myself, this movie is insane. I was like, if I remember feeling that much when that movie
broke
ended,
your
I was
brain.
Like, that was insane.
I'll look forward to revisiting that one. Eric Fuchs went with Upstream Color. Never saw it and don't have a huge draw to now.
Yeah, well, Shane Carruth is an asshole, but I did like that movie when it came out.
Yeah, no, I heard good things and I was very much anticipating it. But I also wasn't as crazy about Primer as everybody else. Like, I thought it was good, but
for what Primer is, it's quite good. But
yes,
it's like super lo-fi. I made this in my basement kind of movie. So.
No, it's another one of those movies where I think the drive of it is not that it's a good movie. It's that it should make people want to make movies.
Sure. And it did. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then last but not least, Steven Esbella went with Border from 2018. You saw this, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah. The I believe it's Swedish movie. It's good. You should see it. It's kind of a contemporary fairy tale, and there's some stuff in it that is pretty shocking.
Yeah, no, that's why I remember you talking about it being like, there's some pretty shocking stuff. And I remember watching the trailer for it and seeing stuff. I was like, this looks interesting. This looks different.
It's good. I've also read the short story by Thomas Alfredson, the guy who wrote Let the Right One In.
That's right. That's what I was like. I know there's something else about the movie that I'm forgetting, and that was it. But thank you, everybody, for your shelf picks. Love seeing these, and cannot wait to see what shelf picks we get next week for Dungeons and Dragons. Well, now we do have to do some calls to action, but stick around because Travis is going to be talking about the new season of Love, Death, and Robots over on Netflix. And I'm going to talk about one of the nastiest exploitation movies I've ever seen, starring Linda Blair. So to remind everybody, we have our Q&A episode coming out in July, and we need Q's to A. You can submit questions on GenreVision.com. There's a page that you'll see on the homepage for Q&A questions. You can comment on that. You can send us an email at genrevisionpod@gmail.com. You can tweet at us. Basically, there's a number of ways that you can get questions to us, but we need questions. So please submit them, and we will be answering them. You can ask us anything. Anything at all, go for it.
Yes, make sure to get your questions in by the end of June.
And as always, we have our pre-show over at Patreon where we talked about Dungeons & Dragons because we are playing Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. And had a nice philosophical conversation about some stuff revolving around Dungeons & Dragons. And you can listen to our pre-shows every week if you become a premium subscriber at patreon.com/GenreVision. For just $5 a month, you'll get access to every weekly pre-show we do, as well as other additional content like monthly extended currently consuming episodes, additional content for all of the GenreVision shows like Finflix and Third Time's the Charm, and some special stuff that we do every once in a while. So if any of that sounds appealing to you and you like keeping the show alive, go to patreon.com/GenreVision and become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. And we have the most exciting CTA news. We have a new review on the Apple Podcast Store. This comes from user, I believe it's Pat J. Ocon. Pat says, 5 stars, check them out. I've been enjoying Drew and Travis's podcast for some time now, and I'm sorry it took this long to give them a shout out. I look forward to tuning into their show on a weekly basis and hearing two friends with good chemistry banter back and forth about movies old or new or crappy or classic. It should go without saying that I certainly don't always agree with them. That would be a tad weird, right? Side note, yes, it would be. But their opinions always seem to come from a well-informed and honest perspective. It's easy to hear they dig what they're doing and that they're excited to be part of a show that folks keep enjoying. Keep up the good work, fellas, as you've got an ear down in Austin. Thank you so much. It's very nice to know that our enthusiasm does come across. Like, we love doing the show and love doing it for everybody. And I'm glad that for gosh, how many years have you and I been doing this now? 5?
Let's see. You and I started in 2016 doing this. So yeah, it's been 5 years.
5 years, yeah, and I've been doing it for 7. I'm so grateful that enthusiasm is still it comes across, and thank you so much. If you want to be as awesome as Pat Jocon or Pat J. Ocon, go to the Apple Podcast Store and leave us a rating and review, and we will feature it here on the show when you do. Let's do some currently consuming. Nom, 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 nom. Travis, what's been on your plate?
I watched the most recent update to the Love, Death, and Robots animation anthology show on Netflix. This is the second round of episodes they have released, and I'm impressed. There are fewer episodes in this batch than there were in the previous one. I think it's only 8 episodes now, and most of them are fairly short. But the first season had like a wider variety, and that's not necessarily a good thing because there were like totally hollow shorts from a narrative level that were just like really impressive tech demos of like getting, photorealistic animation. It was like, that's okay. That's a fine tech demo, but I don't care about what's going on here. It's not doing anything interesting from an artistic standpoint. It's just a tech demo. It was kind of like the Lion King remake. This batch does have some incredibly realistic animation, but I found all the stories to be fairly interesting. There's a good mix of horror and, more straight up science fiction and speculative fiction stuff. This is a shorter, sort of like punchier batch of stories, and I fully recommend it. If you enjoyed Love, Death, and Robots Season 1, you will enjoy these 8 new episodes as well. I really enjoyed, I believe it's the second one, which had kind of a 2D art style that reminded me a little bit of Zima Blue from the first season.
Yeah,
which was
I like Zima Blue.
Awesome episode of TV. And then there is one that's kind of set in a Blade Runner-y future where having children is outlawed. And that one is my favorite by far in terms of writing. It has, I guess you could say, a more realistic animation style, but the character designs are a little bit more angular and sort of cartoonified. The protagonist of that story in particular has a really iconic angular face that reminded me a lot of Marv from Sin City. It's a cool short, man. And it's got a very dark concept, but it's not edginess for edginess' sake. Like, it really does have something to say that I thought was a strong viewpoint. And it's Love, Death, and Robots, just more of what you like and not so much of it, but that is okay.
Yeah, I've got that on my schedule to watch this weekend. I decided to watch a exploitation movie from the 1980s. This is Savage Streets, the only other, I believe, non-porn directed film from Danny Steinman, who directed Friday the 13th Part 5. This stars Linda Blair. my God, well, like if anybody's ever seen Friday the 13th Part 5, that movie is so vulgar in so many ways. Like not just with the nudity, but with the language and everything. And it gets topped by Savage Streets. Savage Streets is one of the nastiest exploitation movies I've ever watched, because it's a very simple revenge vigilante story, with Linda Blair being the one doing the revenging, where her deaf sister, played by Linnea Quigley, is eventually assaulted by a gang, and then the gang also, spoiler alert, later kills Linda Blair's best friend, and she's like, they're in like a tough fuck you girl gang at their high school. John Vernon's the principal, and he says things like "go fuck an iceberg."
What?
Like the cursing in this is so. I there are things I can't say that this movie says. That's like, Jesus Christ! Like, this is real. You could never say these things in movies again, and maybe that's a good thing. Also, I mean, it is.
Nobody showed this video to Rob Zombie. Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure he's seen it, but like, it's also. I mean, it's an ugly. It's a halfway a porno movie, and this is all set at a high school, and yeah, they're seniors, but like I don't need to see the locker room shower scene, like where they're all standing around naked for no reason.
Yeah, well,
like,
De Palma got away with it.
Sure, but he had something to say here. I mean, please, I beg of you, Travis, watch this movie so you can hate it.
Well, considering what you said about it so far, like, I gotta see it. If you think it's one of the nastiest exploitation movies you've ever seen, you know I'm gonna watch it.
It's nasty in terms of tone. It's not like it's the most gory, because the gore and the killing really does not happen until the very end. Linda Blair is giving a B movie performance that is just, it's something. But I mean, this is Salacious doesn't even do it justice. Like, I felt dirty watching this movie. Like, I'm like, am I on a list now? Like, from watching this? I can't believe, like, it's currently available in the US on Amazon Prime, and it looks like they've got the restored version. It looks pretty good. As good as a scummy movie like this can be, because it is a scummy movie. It is. I'm very surprised at the things it gets away with, and it's the kind of movie that should never be made again. But I'm glad I checked it off the list. It's not great, like in regards of, wow, this is an exceptional. Like, I've seen better vigilante movies and better grindhouse movies than this, but it's just so notable for being like, my God, the things these people are saying are just. No, like, humans don't talk like that. Humans don't curse like that.
No.
Like there's just so
I hate to
much.
break it to Rob Zombie, but somebody should tell him that.
It did. Yeah, exactly. It feels like a prototype of that kind of stuff. So if that at all interests you, Savage Streets, go check it out. And let's wrap things up with our
Comment of the week.
And this is another, we're going to have to give a group award here, because once again, the amazing commenters at GenreVision.com got off on a beautiful tangent regarding Tammy and the T-Rex, in which Stephen Isabella showed his brother-in-law, showed him Tammy and the T-Rex, and which we did an episode on. Go listen to it. It was very fun. We quite enjoyed that movie. And they got off on a tangent of a Tammy and the T-Rex musical. This is between like Stephen Isabella and Mr. Milksteak, as well as Eric Fuchs. And I can't even spoil. They wrote lyrics for some of the songs.
Oh, jeez.
and so I don't want to spoil it. Like, first of all, I mean, you need to be familiar with Tammy the T-Rex and then read these lyrics, because they were very funny. Bravo.
What blows my mind is that I thought when we did Tammy and the T-Rex, I'm like, yeah, nobody will bring this movie up again. And lo and behold.
No, how can you not? How can you not bring up Tammy and the T-Rex, a movie where we can't even begin to list up? We've done a couple movies recently where it's like, we just don't have the time to list every single mad thing that happens in these movies.
I know. It's just a nonstop cavalcade of crazy moments, movie like that. So I'm glad that our listeners are sort of finding the same pleasures that we do in these movies. It's really fun to see that.
Absolutely. And that is going to conclude May is Magical Month, and we're going to go right into another theme month with time travel movies. And I think go to the schedule page at GenreVision.com, and you can check out the schedule for June. I think we've got a really good eclectic bunch of time travel movies.
I think so, and we're kicking it off next week with Van Damme in Time Cop.
Yeah, his most profitable movie ever. So we'll see. As a big JCVD apologist, I know I saw Time Cop. We'll see how the second viewing goes. But we hope you'll join us next week. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.